I still remember the day my wife passed away from cancer. We had been together since we were 15. She wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. It's been 2 years now, but the pain feels just as fresh some days. Every morning, I wake up and for a split second I forget she's gone. Then reality hits, and I have to face another day without her. Working at the local bank where we both started our careers right after college has become a daily challenge. The break room where we used to share lunch and talk about our dreams for the future is now just an empty space I avoid. Instead, I eat alone at my desk, trying not to think about how she used to surprise me with my favorite sandwiches, or how her laugh would brighten up even the dullest Monday morning. Depression became my constant companion after she died. It's like carrying around a heavy backpack that you can't take off. I stopped doing the things we used to enjoy together. Hiking on weekends, watching our favorite TV shows, even gardening. Her gardening tools still sit untouched in the backyard, and I can't bring myself to move them. Her books still line our shelves, and her winter coat still hangs by the door. Sometimes I find myself talking to it, pretending she's just about to walk through the door and put it on. The only person who truly understood what I was going through was my wife's younger sister. She became my rock during those dark times. Unlike others who kept telling me to move on or get over it, she understood that you don't just get over losing someone, you learn to live with the empty space they left behind. We started spending more time together, usually just watching TV or sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes we'd share memories about my wife, and those moments helped keep her memory alive. Our routine became a lifeline for me. My sister-in-law would invite me over for dinner, making sure I wasn't spending too much time alone with my thoughts. We'd text throughout the day, checking in on each other, especially during those particularly hard moments. Birthdays, anniversaries, or just random Tuesday afternoons when grief would hit unexpectedly hard. My wife's parents became like my own after I lost my folks in high school, and they doubled down on their support after their daughter passed away. They made sure I was included in every family gathering, every holiday celebration. I'd help them with house repairs or technology problems, and they'd share stories about my wife's childhood that I'd never heard before. Those evenings at their house were both healing and heartbreaking. I could see so much of my wife in her mother's smile and her father's laugh. Life settled into a new normal. Not a happy one, but one I could manage with the support of my wife's family. Then everything changed one Friday night when my sister-in-law invited me over for our usual pizza and beer evening. We talked about work, shared some laughs, and as usual, ended up reminiscing about my wife. But something was different that night. The air felt charged with unspoken words, and before I knew what was happening, we crossed a line we could never uncross. The next morning, I woke up filled with shame and confusion. How could I have betrayed my wife's memory like this? How could I have complicated the one relationship that had helped me stay afloat all this time? I left before my sister-in-law woke up, leaving just a note saying I needed time to think. The drive home felt endless, each mile adding to the weight of guilt on my shoulders. For 2 days, I avoided everyone, trying to make sense of what had happened. When my sister-in-law finally called and asked to meet at the local park, I knew I couldn't run from this conversation forever. What she told me there would change everything I thought I knew about our relationship, and force me to question everything I believed about loyalty, love, and moving forward after loss. Sitting on that park bench, watching kids play in the distance, I wasn't prepared for what my sister-in-law was about to tell me. She confessed that she'd had feelings for me for over a year. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. All those evenings we'd spent together, all those text messages and shared moments, had they meant something different to her all along? She explained how these feelings had grown from our shared grief and comfort in each other's company. As she spoke, my mind was spinning. Part of me felt betrayed. How could she develop these feelings while we were mourning her own sister? But another part of me understood. Grief does strange things to people, and we'd been each other's lifeline during the darkest period of our lives. I told her I needed time to process everything. The guilt of what happened was already overwhelming, and now her confession added another layer of complexity to it all. I was still deeply in love with my wife. The thought of being with someone else, especially her sister, felt like I was trying to replace her. But my sister-in-law assured me she wasn't expecting anything from me. She valued our friendship above all and suggested we take some time apart to figure things out. The following days were a blur. I spent hours looking at old photos of my wife, trying to imagine what she would say about all this. Would she be angry? Disappointed? Or would she want me to find happiness again? The questions kept me up at night, tossing and turning, searching for answers that wouldn't come. My feelings were more complicated than I wanted to admit. My sister-in-law had become more than just family to me. She brought light into my life when everything was dark, but was it right to explore these feelings? Could I ever move past the guilt? These questions haunted me every waking moment. She gave me the space I needed, but knowing she was just a phone call away made things even harder. Her understanding and patience only made me admire her more, which in turn made me feel even more guilty. It was a vicious cycle of emotion that I couldn't break free from. The hardest part was knowing I had to tell someone about what happened. My wife's mother had always been there for me, offering wisdom and comfort when I needed it most. After days of internal struggle, I decided to talk to her. I invited her for coffee, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Sitting across from her in the coffee shop, looking into those kind eyes that reminded me so much of my wife, I almost lost my nerve. But I knew I had to be honest. I started by telling her how much the family meant to me, how they'd filled the void left by my own parents. Then, gathering all my courage, I told her everything. About that night with her younger daughter, about the confused feelings, about the guilt that was eating me alive. Her reaction surprised me. She didn't yell or cry or tell me to never show my face again. Instead, she simply sat there, her coffee getting cold, and listened. When I finished speaking, she said something I'll never forget. Grief can make us do things we might not otherwise consider. It doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it. She admitted she was disappointed but also said she could see how much pain I was in. Her calm response made me feel both better and worse. Better because she didn't hate me. Worse because I felt I didn't deserve such understanding. When she asked about her younger daughter's feelings, I had to be honest about that too. You both need to think carefully about your next steps, she said, not just for your own sake, but for everyone who cares about you. She promised to keep our conversation private until we figured out how to move forward, but her words were a reminder that our actions would affect more than just us two. The hug she gave me before leaving was tight and genuine, filled with both forgiveness and caution. As I watched her walk away, I realized that the hardest part of my journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Now I had to figure out what I really wanted and how to move forward without destroying the family that had held me together when I was falling apart. After that conversation with my mother-in-law, everything changed. Not in big dramatic ways, but in small important ones. My sister-in-law and I decided to see a therapist together. Not because we were sure about being a couple, but because we needed help understanding if what we felt was real or just a product of our shared grief. The therapy sessions were tough. We had to dig deep into our feelings, questioning everything. Was I attracted to her because she reminded me of my wife? Was she drawn to me because I was a connection to her sister? Some days we'd leave those sessions emotionally drained, barely able to look at each other. Other days we'd find clarity and understanding that made us feel closer than ever. My father-in-law found out eventually. My mother-in-law had kept her promise about keeping it quiet. But in a family as close as ours, secrets don't stay secret forever. He took it harder than his wife did. I still remember him showing up at my door one evening, his face a mix of anger and hurt. We talked for hours that night, both of us crying at times. By the end, he didn't approve exactly, but he understood. That's all I could ask for. Not everyone in the family was as understanding. My wife's cousin, who had been like a brother to her, stopped talking to both of us. Some aunts and uncles started treating me differently at family gatherings. It hurt, but I couldn't blame them. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be in this situation, I wouldn't have believed it either. My sister-in-law and I took things incredibly slowly. We didn't rush into a relationship just because our feelings were out in the open. Instead, we focused on building something new, something that honored the past while looking toward the future. We stopped our regular pizza and beer nights for a while, choosing instead to meet in public places where we could talk without the pressure of being alone together. Some days were harder than others. I'd wake up feeling guilty, wondering if I was betraying my wife's memory. On those days, my sister-in-law would give me space, understanding that my heart was still healing. She had her own difficult days too, times when looking at me reminded her too much of her sister and the life she'd lost. But slowly, very slowly, things began to change. We started creating new memories that had nothing to do with our shared loss. We found new restaurants to try instead of going to the ones I'd frequented with my wife. We made new traditions, careful not to replace the old ones, but to build something different, something that was uniquely ours. A year has passed since that night that changed everything. My sister-in-law and I are still figuring things out, taking each day as it comes. We're not living together or making any huge plans for the future, but we're no longer pretending that what we feel for each other isn't real. My wife's photo still sits on my bedside table, her books still line our shelves, and yes, her winter coat still hangs by the door. But now these things bring more smiles than tears. They're reminders of a love that helped shape me into who I am, not weights holding me back from finding happiness again. The family is healing too. Last Christmas, my mother-in-law set places for both of us at the dinner table, right next to each other. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. My father-in-law even cracked a joke about it, something he wouldn't have been able to do 6 months ago. I've learned that the heart doesn't have a limited capacity for love. Loving someone new doesn't mean I love my wife any less. She'll always be a part of me, her memory a guiding light rather than a shadow over my future. My sister-in-law understands this better than anyone. She's not trying to replace her sister in my heart, just as I'm not trying to replace her sister in her life. We're writing our own story now, one that's complex and messy and real. It's not the life I imagined for myself, but life rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships come from the most unexpected places, born from shared pain, but growing into something beautiful and unique. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe we'll end up together, maybe we won't. But I do know that whatever happens, we'll face it with honesty, respect, and the understanding that love, in all its forms, is worth the risk of getting hurt again.